Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Max Blumenthal with the Grayzone. It's another Friday. It's Friday the 13th, and I'm here with award-winning Canadian journalist Aaron Mate, who's back with us. And we're going to talk about what everyone's talking about during this major mask-off moment, which appears to be that we're on the precipice of one of the greatest U.S.-backed atrocities of our time in the besieged Gaza Strip. Aaron, how are you doing?
Well, it's an awful time and watching with horror along with everybody else. And but want to thank everybody for joining us. And if you like the stream, please like it. That will help more people see it. But it's an unbelievable moment we're living through. And it's hard to fathom what's already happened to Gaza and what could be happening next. As we're speaking, Israel is about to cut off all the internet access to the Gaza Strip so that those who remain will not be able to reach those of us outside. Israel's ordered over 1 million people to leave the northern Gaza Strip. Israel's told a hospital it has only hours to evacuate. I mean, we can go on and on and on down the list of just unspeakable horrors that are unfolding before our eyes.
Well, we're seeing right as we speak right now, we're seeing some of those millions of people move south from the Beit Hanun area, which is right by the Nahal Oz checkpoint in northern Gaza, so that if you enter Gaza, that you're immediately in the buffer zone, and then you head into the city of Beit Hanun, which is always the first city that's attacked by Israel. And this is where it appears they're going to launch their ground assault in a regime change war in which they want to somehow remove Hamas and then reinstall a puppet government. And they say any puppet can take it. But this entails massive ethnic cleansing, which we'll get into in a second. I just wanted to show what it looks like, what it looked like a few hours ago today from Beit Hanun. It's disproportionately women and children, and you can see some of the bombing behind them in the built-up areas of Beit Hanun. These are U.S.-supplied howitzers, U.S.-supplied missiles. Israel's shelling heavily from its side of the frontier. And this is the shelling that they've endured since the siege on Gaza began in 2007. Half of the residents of the Gaza Strip are children, people under 18, and you're seeing some of them right now. So Israel has distributed, the Israeli military has distributed flyers to everyone who's fleeing from the north. And when we say the north, I guess I should clarify. We're talking about Beit Hanun all the way down to Gaza City, which has been the site of the heaviest bombing because the administrative offices of the government of Gaza, which is run by Hamas, are in Gaza City. So Israel's already destroyed central Gaza City. And these are what the flyers look like, where they're being told to flee to the south. In the leaflet, there's a reference to a humanitarian aid area in the far south adjacent to the Egyptian border. Okay, it's telling you go south to the humanitarian aid zone. So this is the north of Gaza right here where the man's thumb is. That's where Beit Hanun is. In the center of that top square would be the Gaza City area. And then there are more urban areas. There's basically one highway that runs up and down Gaza near the coast. And it's telling everyone to take that highway south to a humanitarian zone, which is just southeast of the city of, which would be towards the city of Rafah. Over here, you have the city of Khan Yunis, which I assume Israel will viciously attack. And what is that? What is that right there? That is essentially a concentration camp within an open air prison. I mean, there's nothing else to call it. It could become a death camp if they bomb it, but it's where people are being told to concentrate, and then they are basically confined to that area. And of course, it's on the Egyptian border, and we're hearing so much about Egypt. One of the pro-Israel talking points today is Egypt must open up for this flood of refugees. Why has Egypt been reluctant to do that? Because they often never go back. And so what we're talking about here is ethnic cleansing, emptying out the Gaza Strip of its people.
I mean, the Gaza Strip itself is dominated by refugees and their descendants. It's what over 70% of the population are refugees and their descendants who were expelled from what is now Israel, and some of the communities that were attacked in the Hamas-led assault were formerly, if I had this right, Max, correct me if I'm wrong, were Palestinian villages, right? Some of the areas that were attacked. So
Ashkelon, for example, the city that's taking heavy rocket bombardment, was Majdal Ashkelon before 1948 and was the site of some of the heaviest ethnic cleansing. So great point.
Let me play a clip. This is a Palestinian journalist in Gaza who talks about what happened when people did try to flee at the encouragement of Israel, but then got bombed.
More updates about the evacuation that I've been talking about since the morning. Do you remember when I said that they push people to evacuate from the northern to the southern areas via a safe route, as they said? Okay, that was a trick. They targeted ambulances, cars, and buses in the road, and more than 150 people were killed until now, as I heard from other press and other journalists. So this is part 3. They are playing with us. They are playing with and on us. They told us this is a safe route. Innocent people took anything from their homes and went to the southern areas, and they killed them. They literally killed them. Literally more than 30 ambulance cars until now reached the Shifa, and it's not ended. It's not ended yet. Many people are killed. Most of them are children. The scenes are really hard. I can't even imagine that I'm living this. I can't imagine that this is real. I'm losing my mind. I'm losing my life. Please do something.
So that was a 16-year-old journalist who had taken the trip through Gaza from Beit Hanun through Gaza City, down through the Nuseirat refugee camp towards Rafah, and said that Israel continues to bomb people along the way there. We might even have some footage of that 150 people have been reported wounded while evacuating, while attempting to take that trip. Something like 40 people have been killed, and hospitals are being evacuated. Of course, they're overrun, overwhelmed. I'll show you some footage of what Gaza City looks like right now as Israel prepares what appears to be a ground invasion. And this was filmed by a BBC journalist named Rushdie Abu Aluf, and this is his neighborhood. This is the neighborhood of Rimal, where I've stayed in central Gaza City. I have many fond memories of meeting friends in cafes and restaurants here. It was actually kind of a middle class area, an area where many people might not have voted for Hamas. And it's being targeted because it's where administrative offices were, and precisely because it's where the middle class population is. Israel has targeted that population to try to pit it against its leadership, which will ultimately fail. Let's take another look at that. This is just in 1 week. We have seen the death toll of people under 18 cross 500 now in Gaza. 551 women and children were killed in 1948 in 51 days. And this only took Israel 1 week to meet that milestone. Over 1,000 people have been killed. And this is what the U.S. media calls targeting Hamas. They're bombing Hamas, doing deep bombing operations against Hamas. Essentially, they're just bombing everyday people.
Max, let me ask you, you've covered the 2014 Israeli assault on Gaza that summer. You were there on the ground, and that was one of several Israeli assaults that have happened. It's hard to keep track of all of them. There was the one right before Barack Obama got inaugurated in 2008, 2009. But how does this current assault compare to the previous ones?
Well, I thought 2014 was shocking, having just been in the rubble, but the rubble was largely concentrated in the frontier areas. So to the east of Gaza City, it would be the area of Shujaiya was completely blanketed with artillery and missile strikes and reduced to rubble, as well as the area east of Khan Yunis in the south, which is known as Hosea. And these were areas where the Israeli military invaded, but they stopped short of going into the cities. And then in the cities where I stayed in Gaza City, you would see destroyed homes. They would be targeted with 500-pound bombs, like, targeted missile strikes. But the entire area was left intact. And it wasn't until the end of that war when Israel realized it was going to have to negotiate and kind of wrap up without achieving any real military goals, that they started taking down these civilian towers. One tower next to a friend's place where I stayed, which was actually known as Fatah City because so many people from the previous government that was opposed to Hamas, the Fatah PA government, stayed there. I think it was called Zafar II, was taken down by Israel. This is just a giant tower. And this was sort of considered a major escalation that shocked many people in the Gaza Strip. And they took down the Italian compound, another tower in Gaza City that was purely civilian. Now you see them starting in these cities, starting on these towers, bombing these residential office buildings and towers. And what happens next with the ground invasion is anybody's guess, but it sounds like they're saying they're going to go all the way into Gaza City, dismantle what they see as this gigantic tunnel network. The Israeli Army Chief of Staff has said that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas inside Gaza City, is a dead man along with all the people around him. And here's what the president of Israel, which is a mostly ceremonial position, occupied by someone who was put there because he was seen as more palatable to the Democratic leadership in Washington, Isaac Herzog from the Labor Party. This is what he had to say, and I see you've already got it up there. Well, he said, the entire nation of Palestine is responsible. It's not true, this rhetoric about civilians being not aware, not involved. And so he has declared all Palestinians collectively responsible for the October 7th military attack or guerrilla attack on Israel, on Israeli kibbutzim and military bases. And that essentially erases the Geneva Conventions and any pretense to not targeting civilians directly. And that's really the distinction here, is that Israel has decided that the gloves are completely off. We're going to see Israel as it really is, a true reflection of Israel in the rubble of Gaza as its troops prepare to enter. And who let them take the gloves off? Who let the dogs out? Joe Biden and Tony Blinken.
Well, speaking of Blinken and Biden, this just dropped from the Huffington Post, where basically there was a State Department memo circulated to U.S. government employees, to State Department officials. And this is what it said. It said that hours after Israel ordered an exodus in Gaza, State Department officials circulated internal warnings against 3 phrases. So Tony Blinken, State Department, is telling employees not to use these 3 phrases. Quote, de-escalation, ceasefire, end to violence, bloodshed, restoring calm. So all those words there, according to Tony Blinken, State Department, are now off limits. You cannot talk about de-escalation and end to the violence. And that's why, presumably, Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, in response to being asked about some calls for a ceasefire, said that those calling for a ceasefire are repugnant. That was the White House press secretary.
Yeah. So that was the messaging we were getting inside the State Department when I went there on October I believe it was October 10th, we are credentialed, and we've been present in State Department briefings through Liam Cosgrove. But I went in there for the first time to question State Department spokesman Matthew Miller. The briefing was delayed because Joe Biden was going to give an address in the Rose Garden, his first statement on Israel-Palestine. And it looked like he had taken a long nap because he was about an hour and a half late. So we were just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. And then it finally got going and I got called on. Here's Forbes actually covered this. And you'll see that messaging, Aaron, that you just mentioned clearly playing out here, where they are told to express horror at anyone questioning Israeli atrocities. Condemned Israel's finance minister Bezalel. In March, you condemned Israel's finance minister Bezalel Smotrich for calling for wiping the Palestinian village of Huwara off the map. This week, we've heard the defense minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, declare that he's fighting human animals in Gaza as Israel cuts off the gas, the water, and the electricity. We've heard Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, declare that all hiding places will be turned to rubble in a besieged coastal enclave where there are 1 million children. We've heard Ariel Kalner, who is a member of Knesset from the ruling Likud party, call for a Nakba 2.0, which is essentially a call for genocide and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians as 850 are dead in Gaza. So what do you think of that rhetoric in light of your previous condemnation?
Let me say a few things about that. Number one, we expect, as we said, that Israel will conduct its operations in accordance with international law. Number two, there are going to be a number of statements made over the course of this conflict. And when we have disagreements with them, we will make those known privately. Number three, though, let me just.
I said you made them public before.
Some of the questions I'm getting today do seem to ignore the fact that Israel just had hundreds of its citizens killed, people who were taken hostage.
He's essentially saying anything goes at this point. You can't ask about what Israel is doing.
Yeah. And that Israel shouldn't be able to conduct any kind of. Let me just say, because let me
Palestinian children have been killed. Do you acknowledge that? Will you even acknowledge that?
Let me finish.
80 Palestinian children killed.
You know what?
Week?
Again,
babies.
You asked a question. I will answer.
Now the number is 5 times higher than that.
So the question.
Okay, that's my question.
So I'm going to start by answering the previous question that was interrupted. I will say some of the questions seem to pretend that Israel should not be able to conduct operations to defend itself and hold accountable the terrorists who killed civilians. That is not Israel's policy. That is not our policy. It is something that we would vehemently disagree with. Israel has the right to secure its country the way any country does. It has the right to defend itself against terrorism. It has the right to hold terrorists accountable. And I will say, ultimately, the Hamas terrorists who launched these operations, there is no one who has more disregard for Palestinian civilian life than those terrorists. Because those terrorists, let me finish. Those terrorists launched this activity. Those terrorists, again, we seem to have a lot of new people.
A lot of new people.
Those terrorists launched.
I said they have less regard than the people who've killed over 850 people by that point, bombing residential towers, bombing office buildings. And he says, oh, we have a lot of new people in here.
Launched this activity knowing that there would be retaliation.
He's basically saying, how the hell did this guy get in here?
Knowing that Israel would have to defend itself as any country did, knowing that it would lead to the unfortunate loss of civilian lives by Palestinians, and they did anyway. Let me go ahead.
That's amazing.
So baby killing is okay here.
Why can't you acknowledge that That's Sam Husseini saying baby killing is okay here.
We always mourn the loss of civilian life. It is an unfortunate circumstance every time it happens. And as I just said, the Hamas terrorists who launched this terrorist attack, knowing that it would produce the loss of not just direct Israeli lives, who they took in their incursions across the border, but also the loss of Palestinian civilian life, they ultimately bear the responsibility for those acts.
So Hamas is bombing its own people is essentially what he's saying. And that's the messaging that we've got continuously from the State Department, as well as Biden minutes before that exchange, declaring that Hamas is ISIS and that they kidnapped people took captives and killed people because they just simply want to kill Jews. And that's simply what this is about, is killing Jews. Biden essentially replaced what's left of his brain with Netanyahu, as did the rest of the US media. Yeah.
Well, meanwhile, let's hear what Israeli officials are calling for. They don't often acknowledge the Nakba, if ever, inside Israel, the founding ethnic cleansing campaign when Israel was established in 1948 that expelled hundreds of thousands of people, including many people who were forced to go to Gaza into refugee camps. But now the Nakba is being acknowledged, including by one politician who said we need another Nakba right now in Gaza.
Well, after the Hamas attack, a member of Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party, also a member of the Knesset, said this on the social media platform X. Right now, one goal, Nakba, a Nakba that will overshadow the Nakba of 48, Nakba in Gaza, and Nakba to anyone who dares to join. Nakba, or the catastrophe, refers to the forced exodus of Palestinians from their homes in 1948, when the State of Israel was created.
And that's precisely what I asked Matthew Miller at the State Department about. They had condemned Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, before for calling for wiping off the map an entire Palestinian village near Nablus and near a illegal and fanatical settlement called Huwara. But they wouldn't condemn this. Matthew Miller said, oh, well, we will make clear to our friends in private that we don't like that rhetoric. But they're borrowing that rhetoric. And here's what it looks like inside Tel Aviv right now. This is over a highway in Tel Aviv on the biggest street. This is the it's this major highway that runs north through south from Tel Aviv, known as the Ya'alon. Victory looks like 0 people in Gaza, and genocide Gaza. Genocide Gaza.
And,
those are put up. These
yeah.
are grassroots groups putting these signs up.
Yeah. And, on this claim that from Netanyahu, which U.S. officials like Biden have echoed, that Hamas is ISIS. In the case of Netanyahu, I think he even said Hamas is worse than ISIS or something to that effect. But, I mean, you pointed out that Israel in Syria supported ISIS. ISIS fighters were treated in hospitals, or at least their allies were treated in hospitals, people fighting with ISIS. Israel was paying for the weapons and the salaries of insurgents who were fighting alongside ISIS. And, these claims, which have since been shown to be a scam, that Hamas beheaded 40 babies inside an Israeli town. Compare that to who the U.S. was supporting inside of Syria. I mean, you've covered this at the Grayzone, Max. It reminded me of a beheading we know occurred, actually. That was of a Palestinian in 2016 who was, 12 years old, a very young kid, who was beheaded by Noor al-Din al-Zinki. And that was among the so-called moderate rebels that the U.S. was supporting.
Yes, the CIA was directly supporting that group, Noor al-Din al-Zinki, as they beheaded a 19-year-old who actually happened to be a Palestinian refugee who was fighting on the side of the Syrian army, defending a Palestinian refugee camp. So Moshe Ya'alon, who is the former Israeli defense minister, told the Times of Israel, anyone watching now can pull this up, that he prefers ISIS to the Syrian government and would prefer ISIS on the Golan side of the border. If there is a regional war, ISIS and the al-Qaeda-aligned forces in the northwestern Idlib province of Syria, they will not be joining on Israel's side against Israel. In many ways, they are on Israel's side. They may even be used as a regional wedge against Hezbollah. But beyond that, we have to understand what this rhetoric is about and what it's being used for. And I think Syria does help us understand really well. So does Iraq. So does Afghanistan, because we're hearing that this was Israel's 9/11. We constantly hear this was Israel's 9/11. It's all about establishing a red line to draw the West in so that Israel can have complete latitude, first of all, to level the Gaza Strip, carry out, as Ariel Kalner, the member of Knesset, called for a Nakba 2.0, but then to start acting regionally against all of the allies of Iran and ultimately to strike Iran. And that would only be possible through U.S. weaponry, through U.S. support for in-air refueling of tactical nuclear weapons. And that is what Netanyahu has wanted ever since he came back into the prime minister's office. But what happened with us when we accepted that 9/11 was 9/11, the American public? We walked straight into Iraq and straight into a military, moral, and political catastrophe. And as I wrote a whole book about how that produced Donald Trump. Afghanistan as well, complete catastrophe that ended in one of the biggest acts of military folly in recent American history with the Afghan withdrawal. The destruction of ISIS entailed destroying half of the city of Raqqa and much of the city of Mosul, tens and tens of thousands of civilian deaths. And this is where Israel wants to lead us. And our leadership, from Biden on down, has accepted their rhetoric and accepted their lies and accepted and helped them attempt to establish a red line. And we are on our way through a very what is comparatively a very small conflict, seemingly small conflict, towards catastrophe as the U.S. draws itself deeper into the Ukraine proxy war. Who knows where this is going to stop, Aaron? I mean, who knows? But we have to be clear about where it's going. It's going beyond Gaza. I see Gaza and this ethnic cleansing campaign as the first stage in something regional. What do you think?
It's hard to fathom. I can't. I mean, it makes total sense. I mean, obviously, Israel's run by hegemonic fanatics who are bent on controlling the region. They hate Iran. They want to do, Syria, the dirty war there was a large part of that was trying to, undermine a key ally of Iran and Hezbollah in the name of hegemony. And so what you're saying is quite plausible. It's just hard to fathom.
And we have the three great powers, the three great NATO powers, the UK, France, and the US, bringing naval ships into the Eastern Mediterranean. I believe they're docking in Israel. The US has got the USS Ronald Reagan and the USS Eisenhower, two aircraft carriers there. And that isn't just to protect Israel from a guerrilla army that humiliated its military on October 7th with motorcycle divisions, with a navy that consists of converted fishing boats and paramotors that constitute its Air Force or paratrooper division. It's in expectation of a conflict with Hezbollah, and Israel is putting extreme pressure on the northern border. And meanwhile, we're hearing, this is Democratic Party messaging. Democratic Party messaging is going around calling, trying to frame this in terms of the Holocaust. The Democrats sound exactly like Netanyahu's Cory Booker today.
Terrorists, ISIS-like, Hitler-like folks who hate Jews and want to kill them. It's because we cannot let these terrorists, this ISIS-like, Nazi-like people win. And that's why the debate in America should not be a debate. We should have a crystal clarity.
There's no debate,
to support Israel.
He said there should not be a debate.
And to call out these Nazi ISIS-like folks who are targeting civilians.
So it's obvious he got messaging that was crafted by AIPAC telling him to call them Nazis and ISIS in order to turn this into a global religious conflict. This is a Democratic senator, Cory Booker, who's one of the largest recipients of AIPAC money in Congress. It's not Lindsey Graham on the Republican side.
With an attempt not just to kill and murder Jews, not just to kill and use Palestinians as human shields.
Just
to me, there should be no confusion about this for Americans. And I'll say this, not just as a United States senator, not just as a patriot who would die for my own country. I'm going to say this as a black man.
When would he die for his own country? He never served in the military or did anything. Whoa. Now look at what he's about to do now. This is the ultimate appeal.
I'm going to say this as a black man. When you're black in America, you understand the vulnerability within your own country you love. I saw it as an adult on January 6th.
What?
Just like the Nazis, who didn't just destroy 6 million Jews, they destroyed gay people, gypsies.
He called them
I will stand with people who are targets of hate. Hamas, like the Nazis and like ISIS, are people who target with hate. I stand with Jews. I stand with Muslims. I stand with gay folks. I stand with people right now who all have a common cause to stand against Hamas. The same hate that killed blacks in a church in South Carolina are the same people who are wielding the same hate that killed in a synagogue. And so we all need to take an understanding. Everyone has a responsibility to condemn the hatred of this ISIS Nazi like Hamas.
Aaron, I'm throwing up in my mouth. What's your reaction? I can't really talk right now.
He is the hate that he thinks he's condemning. He's expressing contempt for Palestinian babies in spewing all this ridiculous rhetoric that's used to murder them. He's the hate. That's why he's so passionate, because he's actually talking about himself. He is projecting. And I mean, he says so much insanity there. And of course, he has to bring in the January 6th somehow, because that's all Democrats can talk about when they try to sermonize January 6th. Like, you have to throw in one mention of that along with calling everyone else Nazis, except for the Ukrainian neo-Nazis that he's voting to arm every single time, and the Ukrainian Nazis that are getting standing ovations in Canada's parliament, except for them. But yeah, no, that's just so, I don't know what to say to that. It's
Chris Hayes is nodding along.
Yeah.
Chris Hayes is someone, I don't know if you knew him, but he'd always give me a pat on the back at the Nation about the work I was doing on Palestine. He was always pretending to be friendly. And there you see, he's nodding along. Honestly, if he didn't nod along, they probably, MSNBC executive would have pushed an eject button. He would have flown through the roof out into the street and never come back again. And you look at, have you watched CNN at all? It's like essentially the media wing of the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And I'll get into that in a second. But what Cory Booker is doing, Aaron, is a lot what Jamie Raskin did on Russia, which is to frame this war, which is very different from Russia's war in Ukraine, a war of ethnic cleansing, a war of the maintenance of an ethno-supremacist state through violent demographic engineering, as a woke war, a war for gay people, a war for minorities, a war for the safety of Black America, and frame it in terms of January 6th and the Ku Klux Klan and Nazi Germany. These are talking points he got to appeal to MSNBC's audience of liberal wine ants. And that's what's scary about this, is that the Democratic Party was starting to flip. According to Pew polls this year, most Democrats, particularly younger ones, were less sympathetic to Israel than Palestine. I mean, the polls framed in a stupid way, but it shows how deeply undemocratic the Democratic Party is. And then we got Tony Blinken, who also emerges from within the Democratic Party's foreign policy establishment. He's been in the Clinton administration. He was in the Hillary Clinton State Department. Then he cooled his heels at West Exec Advisors, this corrupt consulting firm he helped found as a kind of government in waiting for the Biden administration. And now he's back. And he says that he has gone to Israel as a Jew and not just as an American diplomat, and is sitting in on their war cabinet meetings. Here's what he had to say.
And of course, what separates Israel, the United States, and other democracies when it comes to incredibly difficult situations like this is our respect for international law and, as appropriate, the laws of war. We do everything we can to make sure that in these situations we avoid civilian casualties. That is in direct contrast with Hamas, which uses people as human shields. It actually seeks to put Palestinian civilians in situations where they could be harmed. This is very much part of their game plan. So we know that Israel will take all of the precautions that it can, just as we would. And again, that's what separates us.
Just as we would. That's what separates us. We're more civilized, Aaron. I mean, he's saying Israel follows international law.
Well, why then did he delete a tweet saying, "I encourage Turkey's advocacy for a ceasefire"? He deleted that tweet because he wants to enable Israel to continue violating international law and massacre people. That's not the first tweet from the U.S. government that's been deleted. This a few times now. Some account, like the Palestinian Affairs account for the State Department, called for a ceasefire. That was deleted as well. Blinken
Yeah, I mean, it's
is
remarkable. It kind of suggests that Blinken isn't even in control of the State Department.
Yeah.
And who is Tony Blinken? I mean, Tony Blinken is a product of the Israel lobby. He himself is an Israel lobbyist. I mean, think about that. Imagine if an American Secretary of State said, I'm going to Israel, Palestine as an Arab. I am going as a Palestinian. They would be out. They would be done. Israel would have taken down their plane. He says he's going there as a Jew. He's going there as the grandson of Maurice H. Blinken, who was one of the earliest Israel lobbyists this country has known, who founded a think tank that produced an influential paper explaining how the Zionist colonization of Palestine would work out. He is going there as the son-in-law of Samuel Pisar, who raised him since he was age 9, who was a leader of the French Jewish lobby and a counselor to former French President Francois Mitterrand, who also happened to be the consigliere and lawyer to Robert Maxwell, who is well known as the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, child sex trafficker, but also a Mossad agent. And Robert Maxwell's last phone call before he mysteriously fell off his yacht was to Samuel Pisar, the man who raised Tony Blinken. And Tony Blinken has openly stated in paid speeches or speeches before the Israel lobby, AIPAC, that he inherited his commitment to Israel's strength from his family and specifically his grandfather. So this is someone who's totally compromised on every level. He's not advancing America's national interest. The U.S.'s national interest is not the same as Israel. U.S. national security is not the same as Israel. U.S. national security does not benefit from freezing $6 billion owed to Iran, which belongs to Iran, which was seized from Iran, nor does it benefit from fighting Hezbollah, sending aircraft carriers to the region, which are now sitting ducks. These are a trigger point for regional war. So if anyone hits those, and when I say, Aaron, anyone, I mean not just a enemy, a designated enemy, but anyone, it sets the region aflame. Have we ever seen a false flag before in the region carried out in order to drag the U.S. in? I don't know. You might have done some work on that.
Yeah. Well, and the false story about the 40 babies having their heads cut off, that was an early example of that, just at the start of this. But I want to say something about Hamas, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this too, because the way Cory Booker spoke there, that they're Nazis, they want to wipe out all the Jews. I don't personally have anything positive to say about Hamas. I'm not a fan. My friends in Gaza are not supporters of Hamas. I don't hear very good things. But this notion that they're genocidal, that they're driven by this genocidal intent to wipe out Jews, it's just false. Yes, they have that in their charter that they want to wipe out Israel. But Likud, which is the party that Netanyahu comes from, has it in their charter that they'll never accept a Palestinian state. And if you look at the issue that all U.S. politicians claim to support, which is they claim to support this two-state solution, if you look at that issue, people might find this crazy to hear, but I think it's so crystal clear, documented by the record, that Hamas has historically had a more accommodating position on the two-state solution than Israel has. Because Hamas in the aughts started saying that we would accept a Palestinian state inside the 67 borders, which is supposed to be the official position of the U.S. government. That's what Cory Booker, Tony Blinken, Joe Biden all claim to support. Now, they said they would never recognize Israel. But if you're accepting boundaries for a Palestinian state inside the 67 borders, then you're tacitly accepting Israel's borders. That's what Hamas is basically doing. And the entire Arab League supported this because the Arab League offered Israel full peace in exchange for creating a Palestinian state under those borders and a just resolution of the refugee issue. And Hamas is basically saying that they would accept that. They would never recognize Israel, but they would accept the state within those boundaries. Iran also said that they would accept that too. Israel, by contrast, said they'll never, ever accept that because they reserve the right to colonize all of what's called Judea and Samaria, the West Bank that they have these massive settlements in. And Netanyahu said, we'll never, ever accept the Arab peace offer. So, and meanwhile, so there was a window of time when I don't know whether Hamas was sincere or not, but if Israel and the US were actually sincere about their stated support for the so-called two-state solution, they would have explored that and tried to make it happen. Instead, what do? They put Gaza under a crippling blockade. They first tried to organize a coup in Gaza, and Hillary Clinton expressed regret that they allowed elections there because Hamas won. And then finally, when Hamas's position hardened once again, Netanyahu even said that we need to have Hamas in there because it's the best way to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state. So even on the issue that Israel and the US claim to support, which is two states, they've done everything they can to undermine that. First, by ignoring Hamas when Hamas looked like it was changing its position, and then resuming to helping it rule over Gaza when they realized that could help thwart any possible talk of the so-called two-state solution.
Important points. And another point that needs to be made, it can't be made enough, is the occupation predated the existence of Hamas.
That's right.
Hamas exists as a response to continuous occupation and the fecklessness of Palestinian leadership. That's what they owe their popularity to, as well as their willingness to engage in armed struggle. Hamas literally had one gun when it started holding public marches in Gaza City. It had one gun that was a Swedish submachine gun, and it couldn't even fire bullets properly. They just displayed it to look like tough guys. The Israeli occupying authorities in Gaza gave them freedom of movement in Gaza to undermine the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was more secular and considered more of a threat. They even funneled money through the Mossad into the coffers of mosques and organizations affiliated with what would become Hamas. Hamas was officially formed in 1988. It was one of the few Palestinian factions that rejected the Oslo Accords, which was a disaster waiting to happen. It's because of the Oslo Accords that there is a separation wall inside the West Bank surrounding East Jerusalem. It's because of the Oslo Accords that the Gaza Strip is now under siege, because the Oslo Accords provided the basis not only for the extension of Israel's settlement enterprise under the guise of wanting peace, but for the hard separation of the Palestinian population. So Hamas earned popularity by rejecting that. The Marxist-Leninist PFLP, they accepted the Oslo Accords and they went to hell.
Yeah,
they're just experiencing a comeback now. Hamas then experienced growth in popularity because of the corruption of the Palestinian Authority and their collaborationism with Israel security services. And one of the cities in the Palestinian legislative elections that voted most heavily for Hamas was in the West Bank. It's actually in the West Bank and not Gaza where Hamas was more popular, because they were surrounded by that wall. Qalqilia, the city of Qalqilia, was surrounded by the apartheid wall on all sides. Qalqilia is now kind of famous for its parkour teams of, teenagers and young people, because there's so much wall for them to jump on. And so they said, well, these guys are willing to resist. We'll vote for them. Well, you got to understand, if you go to the Gaza Strip, people who hate Hamas because of what they represent, young people who would like to, come and hang out at a bar with me or something, they support Hamas's efforts to hold Israel's occupation accountable through armed force. It's almost universal there, because, as Aaron, you explained, every diplomatic channel for them to even relax the siege, for them to ever leave, has been completely cut off by the backers of Israel, the United States and the EU, as well as Israel itself. And so it wasn't just Hamas that launched this attack on October 7th. There was also Palestinian Islamic Jihad, it's backed by Iran, but it's a local homegrown organization that's also popular, that doesn't even serve in politics. Their whole thing is resistance. They don't participate in politics. They think it compromises the organization, and they are popular as well, simply because, not because of their ideology or because of their religious views necessarily, but because they are willing to resist Israel. And that's something that the US can't quite understand. Israel understands this. It understands that it has to exterminate the Palestinian people if it is to stop the Palestinian struggle, including the armed struggle. And that's what it's doing right now.
And one more point. So, as you just explained, when Palestinians tried the so-called peace process, they got just more colonization.
Yeah.
So that's what they got for trying to engage in diplomacy. It's just the further colonization of the West Bank, a collaborationist Palestinian Authority doing Israel's bidding, and the further suffocation of Gaza. And then when they also tried another thing that Western politicians and pundits demand, which is they try nonviolence. In 2018, with the Great March of Return, they got gunned down with U.S. weapons. That's just an extraordinary thing that is completely memory hold. But Palestinians, not even Hamas, organized this Great March of Return, marching up to the barrier, marching up to the walls of the cage that they're trapped in Gaza, nonviolently, to protest the siege, to call for the right to return to the homes they and their families were expelled from. And Israel just gunned them down, and the world just watched, and the U.S. applauded basically, and armed them with the weapons. So when they try diplomacy, they get more colonization. When they try nonviolence, they get gunned down.
That's an incredibly important point, because actually the Great March of Return really started in 2015. Youth started showing up at this militarized wall that prevented them from going anywhere in eastern Gaza. And it wasn't until 2019 that Hamas actually supported this march and provided it with kind of infrastructure, with tents and public address systems and so on. But it was supported by Hamas. Hamas supported a march towards the wall without weapons. And we saw people like Razan al-Najjar, the young Palestinian paramedic killed by Israeli snipers. We saw Youssef Murtaja, the Palestinian journalist whose work is actually featured in the film that I co-produced, Killing Gaza, killed with a press vest on. This is Razan al-Najjar. And we heard the U.S. State Department say absolutely nothing. I mean, it was 200 deaths. None of them were carrying guns or bombs. At best, they were carrying burning tires and rocks, and thousands of shattered bones and legs by the Israeli military. And that was felt all across the Gaza Strip. So the mood in the Gaza Strip was, look, we tried appealing to your conscience and walking towards you and saying, we want to go back to our lands without weapons, and you shot us all. So, all right, let's go back to the armed struggle. And in 2021, you saw this major escalation where the Al-Qassam brigades of Hamas showcased what they could actually do by reaching Tel Aviv with rockets, even reaching past Tel Aviv towards Haifa. Today, the occupied Golan was reached for the first time by a rocket from the Gaza Strip. And the whole nonviolent thing was off the table. And, I've covered the unarmed protests in the West Bank against the apartheid wall going back to 2009. I produced many videos on it, just watching Palestinians be shot with 22 caliber bullets, rubber coated steel bullets, having their homes raided at night if they participate in these protests, and children being taken out of their beds and put in jail. I've been to the courts to see children put on trial. How long can they just keep doing that while their land is taken, walls are built through their communities, before they pick up the gun? That's always been the quandary of the Palestinian national struggle. And now we see the desperation has pushed them against the wall, and here we are.
Yeah.
So going back really quick, I want to talk about this burned babies propaganda. But going back to another point I made earlier, I just want to put this on record because Anya tweeted this, because we have U.S. aircraft carriers in the region, immediately in the region. The plot of Netflix's The Diplomat this year was that Iran sank an American ship, but the big reveal at the end, spoiler alert, is that it was actually a UK false flag to draw us into a Middle East war. Also a subplot about US intel assassinating a Prigozhin character. So sort of predictive programming, I don't know. But I watched that show. I sat through it somehow. It was sort of like an act of masochism for me to sit through it. But that was the plot. And, we have seen life imitate what passes for art on Netflix before. As I said, and I just wanted to put it on record, these aircraft carriers and these naval ships, including smaller, more vulnerable ships, are a trigger point. Like Article 5, like an Article 5 level trigger point, like the missiles that the Ukrainian anti-aircraft missiles that landed in Poland, which Zelensky said were Russian, to trigger Article 5, Aaron. So let's.
By the way, speaking of Zelensky, by the way, he reportedly wants to make a solidarity trip to Israel to show his support, which I don't think. I mean, we shouldn't even talk about Ukraine today because there's just Gaza is just horrible. But the fact that Zelensky is falling head over heels to show support for Israel, maybe that will give some progressives who've been duped into supporting the Ukraine proxy war something to think about. But anyway, that's another story.
Well, it's an important point because Zelensky is out of the spotlight, and just as Putin ended the COVID event, perhaps Hamas ended the Ukraine proxy war here, because it's been contingent on Zelensky's occupation of the limelight and being able to gather support for endless shipments of weapons. And also now Ukraine is in direct competition with Israel for America's limited munitions stocks.
Yep.
So we've heard a lot about, well, let me say this. Civilians were killed in kibbutzim that were placed around Gaza as part of the project of containing Gaza and militarily occupying and controlling Gaza. These kibbutzim are directly next to and essentially part of military bases that are used to attack Gaza. Kfar Aza has a major military base. The base of Re'im, where this music festival, this EDM dance festival, was moved 2 days before it was held, directly next to a military base. These bases are being used right now to attack Gaza. Nahalaz as well is a kibbutz that has existed since 1954. But civilians were killed in these areas by Hamas militants. And the circumstances might be unclear, but it would seem enough when lots of Israeli civilians are killed for Israel to elicit sympathy. But that's not apparently what Israel wants. That's why it went so far in pushing its propaganda. And it pushed propaganda claiming that 40 babies had been beheaded by Hamas militants. Why? First, to paint Hamas as ISIS, equivalent to ISIS, because ISIS, this Wahhabi Salafi group, deliberately beheaded its captives and upheld them as trophies to frighten its enemies, and, just sheer religious fanaticism. Hamas actually embodies a different strain of Sunni Islam and is simply not as fanatical as ISIS and does not have international ambitions to attack abroad. So the point was, they're beheading babies. They're just as bad as ISIS. They threaten everybody. They're going to do a day of rage on Friday, and they're going to attack everyone. They're going to get Dan Bongino down at his McMansion in Florida on the beach. They're going to get everybody. And then to set the red line, Aaron, we were so horrified that we have to give them everything they want. So Netanyahu's office fed this to CNN. He fed it to Joe Biden. He fed it to Tony Blinken and everyone he could. And here's today. Yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister's office said that it had confirmed Hamas beheaded babies and children while we were live on air. This is Sarah Seidner, who is reporting this live on air as confirmation, just because the Israeli Prime Minister said it to her. Like, don't you learn? I don't know. You don't even need to go to journalism school to just say the Israeli Prime Minister alleges. But at CNN, you learn to be such a stenographer and such a tool of power that when the word comes from the Israeli Prime Minister, you must treat it as confirmation. The Israeli government now says today it cannot confirm babies were beheaded. I needed to be more careful with my words, and I am sorry. Well, who cares if it says it cannot confirm or it could confirm before? It was never confirmed.
Exactly.
You're just a tool, and you have blood on your hands, because this is what opened the floodgates of a public opinion for supporting what Israel is doing right now.
And let's show a bit of that clip of the original CNN so-called report aka stenographer for the Israeli government.
Some really disturbing new information out of Israel. The
Get
Israeli
some more volume.
spokesman just confirmed babies and toddlers were found with their heads decapitated in Kfar Aza in southern Israel after Hamas attacks in the kibbutz over the weekend. That has been confirmed by the Prime Minister's office. Let us go now to see.
So she says it's been confirmed twice, not once, but twice. Just because the Israeli government said something, then now according to CNN, that's confirmed. That's textbook government stenographer. Government stenography. It's like if you want to go into journalism, then you go into journalism to evaluate the facts for yourself and confirm them for yourself. If you want to be a government spokesperson, work for the government. Go work for the Israeli government or the American government and just repeat what they say as truth. It's so disgraceful. And of course, another person who supposedly confirmed this lie is Joe Biden.
I mean, I've been doing this a long time. I never
you sure have.
thought that I would see and have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children. I never thought I'd ever. Anyway.
I never thought I'd ever. Anyway.
Countries in the region are trying to be of some help.
I mean, if you read body language, it almost seemed like he knew he hadn't seen it.
Yeah. Yeah.
As senile as he was, he should have been able to emphasize his point with the requisite performative outrage and indignation, but instead he trails off and says, anyway, because the background noise, the back chatter that Netanyahu's office was able to create convinced Biden's people that this had to be real. And you have him surrounded by people who have a passionate attachment to Israel, who want it to be real, including ostensibly Tony Blinken. And that's incredibly dangerous. And so Biden's, go ahead.
Well, on that point, check out this headline from NBC News. It's just so disgusting. Inside the White House, as it grapples with the attack on Israel, the attack has shaken an administration from the president on down that feels an emotional bond with Israel and the Jewish community. An emotional bond with Israel and the Jewish community. Now, by extension, if you're saying you only feel an emotional bond with Israel and the Jewish community, then you're saying you support mass murder against the Palestinian community, because that's what the Israel community is doing right now. And there's no such emotional bond there, which means they have just nothing but racist contempt for Palestinians. That's the meaning of their emotional bond with Israel. And this article, if you read it, goes on to say that people in the administration have relatives who are serving inside the Israeli military. So that's a part of their emotional bond, is that their relatives are serving in this genocidal army that is engaging in in a new ethnic cleansing operation. Yeah,
I mean, you can even look at U.S. Congress today, and you had a representative, Brian Mast, who's a Republican and not even a Jew, an evangelical, declaring as the only member of Congress to serve with both the U.S. Army and the Israel Defense Forces, I stand with Israel. Rashida Tlaib's got her flag. I got my uniform. Global Day of Rage, my ass. Tough guy. So he was a foreign fighter for a foreign apartheid army, parading around in the halls of Congress as a de facto Israeli agent, getting taken seriously by the press while he sits on the Foreign Relations Committee, wearing a foreign army's uniform in the halls of U.S. Congress, and attacking a Palestinian American member of Congress whose family's from Palestine for waving a flag of her parents' country. He's not from Israel. This guy's from Grand Rapids, Michigan. But this is the kind of mentality that is accepted. It is can we call it? I mean, he's not Jewish, so I can't be accused of anti-Semitism. He's expressing dual loyalty, if he even is loyal to the U.S. He's a Christian Zionist. Maybe he's an Israel firster. Well, I can call him that because he's not Jewish, so you can't call me anti-Semitic or a self-hating Jew. But it's just bonkers. As Israel is ethnically cleansing 1.1 million people, he's doing this.
Yeah.
And, back to the burned babies propaganda. that actually, I think, occurred on the 33rd anniversary of the Kuwaiti incubator's Naira testimony, which is amazing. And sort of fundamental to the work we do, understanding the Naira incubator babies stories, fundamental, Aaron, I think, to your work on the OPCW inspectors being suppressed on the Duma attacks. I don't know if you want to recap what happened there real quick, but
well, so this was back when the first Bush administration was manufacturing consent for invading Iraq, and so they got a relative, either a daughter, I think, of the Kuwaiti ambassador or a relative of the Kuwaiti ambassador, to come testify before Congress that she had witnessed Iraqi forces ripping babies in Kuwait out of incubators. And her talking points, I think, were also written by a public relations firm. I mean, you know the story better than I, but basically that was a classic case of atrocity fabrication to justify committing atrocities.
Exactly. It was cited by George H.W. Bush on national TV as a cause for sending U.S. troops in and initiating Desert Storm operation, the first Gulf War. Naira's testimony was bought and paid for by the Kuwaiti ambassador through 16 public relations firms. Her testimony was written by Hill and Knowlton, which is a major PR firm in Washington. And it really set the stage for the kind of atrocity propaganda we saw around Syria, with the Syrian white helmets, for example, being created by a PR firm, the Syria campaign, alongside British intelligence, and then feeding stories of chemical attacks in order to trigger the red line, which triggered several US, British, and French military attacks. And those three countries are now in the Eastern Mediterranean. I mean, and then, the whole irony here is you have clear, unadulterated proof of Israel killing masses of babies in the Gaza Strip, but it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not like anyone's going to say, well, this proves the need to arm the people of Gaza to defend them against this atrocity. No.
Right.
It's completely upside down.
Yeah. And
so we managed to kind of, I mean, it wasn't like hard to identify the source of this burned babies story, but basically it started with I-24, which is an Israeli state-sponsored English language news network. It's like Israel's RT or Voice of America. And they sent this lady into Kfar Aza, which is the kibbutz that had been briefly taken by Hamas militants. And she was on a press tour. Basically, the Israeli military just took everybody in there and said, here's what all the atrocities we saw, report this. And this one soldier was running around saying, we saw babies and old people and women with their heads cut off, but he never produced evidence. And actually then Nick Robertson at CNN started repeating that. It just shows you how the media works. They never ask for evidence if it supports their objectives, if the narrative supports their objectives. And this woman, this reporter, I think got put under some pressure to produce the evidence. So she found the soldier that had been running around telling everyone that, and she interviewed him. His name was David Ben-Zion. I guess in American accent, that would be like David Ben-Zion. And we sort of tracked him down, just looking at his social media presence, and determined that he was a deputy commander of a reserve battalion, Unit 71, but he was also an extremist settler from the settlement next to the Palestinian village of Hawara, and he actually presided over violent riots earlier this year after calling for that village to be wiped off the map, calling it for it to be wiped out. So this is David Ben-Zion. Like cut heads of children. And, that's him in uniform. But this is him to the left as a settler, as a leader of the Shomron Regional Council of 35 illegal settlements in the West Bank, who presided over these pogroms against Palestinians earlier this year that were actually condemned by the US. And so he was the source of this whole story. Not exactly a reliable source. Someone who the Israeli security services consider to be dangerous. And now there he is smiling right after feeding this story to the international press via a state-sponsored Israeli news service that is funded through the Israeli Foreign Ministry, that is basically one hand with Netanyahu's office right now. So this is, on the anniversary of the week of Kuwaiti incubator babies. And sorry, I don't have that photo up because I got lost a little bit, but here it is. To the left, here he is, David Ben-Zion as the settler in the occupied West Bank in his illegal settlement, and right, David Ben-Zion as the soldier feeding stories of beheaded babies to the international media, which CNN echoed in order to amplify, or in order to accelerate and intensify the violence on the ground. And the entire Biden administration fell for it. Aaron, I think this is disqualifying for Biden to do something like that. I mean, not that there weren't a million other disqualifying things, but to me, this was one of the most disqualifying, dangerous things he's done.
And on top of being unbelievably reckless with his policies, from the Ukraine proxy war to now Palestine, once again, he himself personally is completely just not with it. And he's also, but the thing is, this is not new for him. He's a documented, almost pathological liar, you could say. He's lied his entire life. He's lied about his career. In the late 1980s, when he was running for the Democratic nomination for president, he was caught plagiarizing some Scottish politician.
No, Neil Kinnock, who was the Labour leader, the opposition leader at
of the
time.
UK. So his life story, he was plagiarizing it for himself. So he's a documented liar and a insane war hawk. And so of course it's disqualifying. But the Democratic Party is in such a state where he is still their standard bearer. And look, this atrocity fabrication, this is par for the course. This is, I mean, the U.S. plenty of experience with this, but also Israel too. I mean, every single major war of conquest, there's a lie that is used to justify it. In 1948, it was that Arab armies invaded Israel to wipe it off the map, and that Palestinians voluntarily left their homes because they wanted to encourage the Arab armies to wipe out all the Jews. In reality, by the time Arab armies had invaded, Israel had already expelled hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes in ethnic cleansing, and the Arab armies were coming in to try to prevent that. 67, Israel claims that somehow in this defensive war, it magically ended up with all this territory that it coveted, including the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights of Syria, which it also still occupies. That was based on the lie that Israel was going to be attacked first, so it had to act. 1982 in Lebanon, it was that Israel was being shelled by the PLO from southern Lebanon into northern Israel. Israel had in fact been bombing southern Lebanon for a long time before that, trying to elicit a provocation that could justify its invasion, because it wanted to wipe out the PLO. Because at that time, the PLO was, an actual national liberation movement, and Israel was determined to wipe that out. So on and on and on. And so this is nothing new. They're just getting more. Now they're drawing it's getting even more creative, I guess, with talking about dozens of babies being beheaded. And
I think you had one of the great tweets of this entire week, which is when Biden announced confirmation, you said, I'll take this as confirmation that these photos don't exist, because you had enough experience with this.
Yeah, because he's a liar, because he's a pathological liar. And also there's been so many times when we've heard these extraordinary claims that turn out to be complete lies to justify actual atrocities committed by us and our allies.
He said he finished top of his class in law school. It turned out he finished second to the bottom. He plagiarized Neil Kinnock. Actually, the speech was handed to him by his top consultant, Bob Shrum, who then oversaw the brilliant 2004 John Kerry campaign. And it was Neil Kinnock's speech, in which Neil Kinnock was himself, I think, kind of cooking up this fake working class background. So he plagiarized a lie. It's amazing. But it's not just Biden. It's not this is unique to Biden. Although Netanyahu is sort of a unique used car salesman level liar who has always sought to lie the U.S. into conflict. Remember when he came to Washington, I believe 2011, and began comparing the failure of the Allies to bomb the railways to Auschwitz to the failure of the Obama administration to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities. He's always been trying to drag the U.S. in. And
he testified to Congress in the run-up
yes.
to the Iraq War about how Saddam Hussein needed to be taken out because he was a threat to the world. Another example of his brilliant military insights.
Yeah, let's see if we can actually get some video of that, because I think it really needs, here it is. This needs to be watched. Just everyone needs to drill this in their heads right now to understand Netanyahu's role. Netanyahu played a seminal role in helping to draw the U.S. into the disaster of Iraq. I mean, the U.S. and Israel mutually manipulate each other, but Israel wants our soldiers to die for its sectarian wars. This is Netanyahu, 2002.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. And I think that people sitting right next door in Iran, young people, and many others will say, the time of such regimes, of such despots, is gone. There is a new age. Something new is happening.
Well, what did we get? We got ISIS, the rise of ISIS, and the calamity that followed that. Thank you, Netanyahu. And, you know, just on the point of these burned babies where the photos never materialized. And again, Israeli civilians have been killed, but they wanted to go way too far with their propaganda to do exactly what Netanyahu is trying to do there, but with Hezbollah and Iran. Here are some real photos of what's taking place in the hospitals of Gaza. These are real.
We should just give a little graphic warning here for anyone who doesn't want to see graphic images. This is your warning.
Yeah, especially if you have children of your own, and it will really highlight the inhuman sociopaths that populate the cable news media offices in our country, who refuse to show these while they're hungering for photos of beheaded Israeli babies that have never materialized. And we need to show these because the rest of the media will not.
And these are actually pretty benign in comparison to what.
And these are not dead children. I didn't want to show dead children. It's just the suffering of children who've had roofs brought down on their heads by U.S. supplied missiles, howitzers supplied by the U.S. Entire families have been killed. 50 families or so have been completely erased from the population records of Gaza. And now many of these hospitals are running out of fuel and electricity and are unable to treat victims. This is Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. The hospitals in Beit Hanun have completely gone out of service. And the main human rights group in Gaza City, which documents these kinds of atrocities, the Al-Mizan Center for Human Rights, I've worked with them while I was there on documentation and identifying victims. They have gone out of service completely. Much of their staff has gone missing. They've run out of electricity and are unable to continue to communicate with the outside world. Israel wants to be able to kill in the dark, and so it's planning to turn off the internet, cut off the electricity, and silence these people who have been called human animals by the defense minister of Israel, who have been called human shields by the president of the United States, the secretary of state of the United States, and who are being cast in the same light as Nazis and ISIS by members of Congress, as it authorizes more munitions to kill more children instead of authorizing a ceasefire which would lead to the release of Israeli captives. 13 Israeli captives have been killed in airstrikes by Israel. And I don't think that the Israeli military leadership regretted that at all. If you consider, look this up if you're watching now, that Israel has had a secret directive, which was exposed in 2014, called the Hannibal Directive, which allows its military, authorizes it to kill captives of enemy factions in order to prevent negotiations that would lead to major concessions and the release of Palestinian prisoners. And it was used to kill Lieutenant Colonel Hadar Golden after he was captured in Rafah by Palestinian armed factions in 2014. The Israeli military killed Hadar Golden. So we've also seen Israel kill journalists. And I believe, Aaron, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the White House has essentially greenlit this killing. They were asked about this attack in southern Lebanon, where Israel is now shelling on several journalists. And the White House said, well, being a journalist is dangerous. These things happen. This is a wounded journalist, I believe, from Al Jazeera English. A Reuters photographer was killed in the Israeli strike. You can see it was a targeted strike where the journalists were standing. They were filming the Israeli side of the border. So that would bring the toll of journalists to over 10. 4 journalists were killed covering an Israeli airstrike on a media office in Gaza City, and many others have been killed around the Gaza Strip. And the journalistic community is not only indifferent, but is cheering this on. One journalist, at least, has been killed there.
Yeah, he was with Reuters. And then how many journalists in Gaza? We don't even know at this point.
Well, I think over this brings the toll killed by Israel over 10. So there have been at least 8, I think, journalists have been killed inside Gaza.
Yeah, and then I mean, UN workers, ambulances bombed as they flee. I mean, it's just, like we can't get to all the atrocities because they just never end.
Is Human Rights Watch and several other human rights groups have confirmed that Israel's using the internationally banned substance known as white phosphorus, which incinerates skin upon contact. This is white phosphorus raining down on, I believe, Beit Hanun. We've seen it over Gaza City. Again, total silence from the State Department on that. And you know whose fault this really is, Aaron?
I can guess. Well, if you're watching CNN, they're probably going to try to find a way to pin all this at the feet of Vladimir Putin.
It's Vladimir Putin's fault, and it's also the fault of it's our fault, kind of, according to Naomi Klein.
Oh, okay.
Why are some of the left? Shouldn't it be why is some of the left, or why are some of the left celebrating the killings of Israeli Jews? I don't know. I wasn't sure where to take this anymore, so
it's just embarrassing.
I just took an off ramp to Naomi Klein, who we both have known. I mean, and then she goes and apologizes for a column, but this is such a mask off moment right now. And here I said she's one of the biggest sellouts I've met in 20 plus years in media. And that's saying a lot because I've also known Mehdi Hassan. She's basically a former radical left poser cashing in as a gatekeeper and informant for snooty transatlantic liberals. She has a whole book out attacking Naomi Wolf because she has the same name. And basically anyone who went anti-establishment during the COVID event. And she's like, let's come back to reality in the establishment. And I'm a former radical leftist who's going to gatekeep the left and tell all of you snooty elite readers of The Guardian what's really wrong with the left. I'm just, Paul Mason with a skirt. Give me your money. Although I don't know if she needs any more than she has. But, disgusting. And she didn't name anyone in the left.
Of course not. No.
And then her article wasn't an attempt to educate readers of The Guardian about the context of this assault or what Zionism truly is. It was a series of virtue signaling proclamations that separated her from the bad left to put her in the camp of the good left. Right now, you're seeing also this sort of anti-war right that emerged around the Ukraine proxy war reveal that it was just against Biden's proxy war, the same way that Democrats were against George W. Bush's Republican war on Iraq.
Yep.
And they are united with large swaths of the center and left in clamoring for the ethnic cleansing and destruction of Gaza. It feels like the whole political spectrum is consolidating around supporting Israel right now, or much of it.
A total mask off moment for the so-called anti-war right. And even you have people like Josh Hawley, the senator who was supposedly against the weaponization of government to, attack dissenting voices. Well, he's now calling for censoring pro-Palestinian voices. So it's such a mask off moment for them too. And it shows again that when it comes to war, hegemony, there's a uniparty. And whatever differences exist between Democrats and Republicans are pretty much always erased when we're talking about something where U.S. hegemony is at stake. And to the point where now the Republican critique of Biden on all this is that somehow him allowing Iran to recover its own money that was stolen from Iran is somehow responsible for this latest crisis in Israel-Palestine. That's where Republicans are going with this.
Yeah,
basically trying to make this about Iran and trying to justify further regime change and destabilization efforts against Iran.
All of them, including Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz is on Twitter thanking Congress for putting Israel on autopay. This is the guy who's called for ending USAID and defunding the Ukraine proxy war. And I don't have any shame about tactically allying with him as I would have with AOC or any other member of Congress over challenging the Ukraine proxy war. But it's still a mask off moment for them. They're not actually challenging the drive to war.
Yeah, and in fact, to win their support, what they're probably going to do is put together a congressional package that combines Israel and Ukraine funding, so everybody gets what they want. And the parties looks like they'll come together on that and just authorizing tens of billions of dollars to arm these two U.S. client states for their own wars on our behalf. And that looks like it's at least one option under discussion. I shouldn't say that's definitely going to happen, but that's one option under discussion. Also, to further militarize the border too, they'll throw in some money for that as well.
Yeah, and just on the issue of sort of left, right, I'm going to use any platform I can get. I think this is the opportunity to educate as many people as possible about the history and roots of this crisis. And it really stems from Zionism and the original sin of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948. And I've been able to find platforms on the right. I went on Tim Pool's show. I went out to his compound and I was given equal time and a fair chance by Tim Pool and his crew to educate his audience. And a lot of them hated me, but some of them responded very positively to that. I went on the show of Stephen Gardner, who's been doing some excellent interviews, for example, with Colonel Doug McGregor on the Ukraine proxy war. And he let me speak for 20 minutes about the history of Palestine. He is a conservative. I could put him in the America First camp, YouTuber out of Utah. And I think there are a lot of openings for us right now, even if Congress is completely controlled and co-opted. And we should also note AOC. She was out there being AOC. She condemned a Palestine solidarity rally in New York, but it was thanks to Jeremy Lafredo, Grayzone contributor, who went out to a pro-Israel rally or the counter protest to show the genocidal fury of those demonstrators on camera in a simple 3-minute video, which led to AOC at least balancing her pathetic messaging by promoting that. And it seems like this video was sort of distributed to this throughout the squad with talking points. And I think that was an important intervention as well. I'm going to try to show that just to get a sense of what's happening out there in the streets, because we're about to see, as we saw in 2021 during the last major military escalation, a wave of bogus anti-Semitism propaganda to create the sense that Hamas is threatening and Palestinians are threatening American Jews, and that Palestine solidarity protests need to be shut down. But only one party in this conflict has the capacity to fulfill the genocidal rhetoric of their supporters. And here it is at this pro-Israel rally in New York City on October 10th.
Palestine! Palestine to my dick!
He's holding a Jewish Defense League flag.
Kill all Palestinians! All of them! Not one left from the river to the sea. Palestine will be deceased! And Israel need to do like this. You see? Now Gaza. Like this. Gaza need to do like this. Or like this, but all this Jewish. Two options.
What do you think the response should be to Gaza?
We gotta wipe them off the fucking map.
I'm
talking about every fucking flat them like a parking lot.
Notice they're in front of the Pfizer building. It's like, they're just in PSYOP City right now.
Yeah, there's nothing else you can do. They proved to us that there's nothing else you can do. We tried everything. It doesn't work. We have to wipe the flat off the fucking map, like a fucking parking lot. I'm not stopping till all Arabs are wiped out.
I think now it's the time that we need to.
This is an Israeli.
Gaza. There is people inside, our people inside, that kidnapped, and now we need to kill all of them and free Israel. All of their belief is killing Jewish and killing and murder our people.
Flatten Gaza.
That will be the last war in Gaza.
This will be.
Yes, it should be.
There's an NYPD drone above the Palestine Solidarity demo. So thanks to Jeremy Lafredo for being on the scene there. And I think AOC's messaging has improved since then.
Well, but I want to say, though, it's great she can condemn fanatics like that. But why isn't she condemning? And I shouldn't make this about her. Why aren't progressives condemning the fanatics in the White House? Tony Blinken for deleting his call for a ceasefire. The White House press secretary for saying that calls for a ceasefire are repugnant. Joe Biden for repeating that lie about the dozens of beheaded babies, giving a green light to ethnic cleansing. I haven't seen members of the squad and other progressives, Bernie, calling out the Biden administration for green lighting ethnic cleansing. It's easy to go after a bunch of random yahoos at a protest and great, but it's good. I mean, but they need to start calling out their own government, because if they just said we need to use our leverage to push for a ceasefire, even that would be something concrete and significant. And I know some people in Congress have done that, but not nearly enough. And that needs to be the immediate demand. That you have to be willing to call out the people at the top, not just random people on the street saying crazy things.
Yeah, I mean, what leverage are they using right now with congressional votes to get some kind of concession from the White House to stop this drive towards, I mean, the term genocide's been so overused and so overexploited to generate regime change and intervention against the designated enemies of the US, whether it's China or Syria, that, we can't even use that word right now. But one of the great atrocities of our time is on the horizon. And I don't know what leverage they're using, but they certainly weren't able to use their leverage to get a vote on Medicare for all. So something that's much closer to the Democratic Party constituency. So I don't expect it now. At least their messaging has been somewhat improved, whereas they've been silent on the Ukraine proxy war. It just feels like every day there's some new tactical ally, but there are no real allies on Capitol Hill for those of us who are actually anti-war and anti-imperialist. And then RFK Jr., I can't go without mentioning him. He was supposed to launch his campaign as an independent on October 9th, and it turned out being like a giant pro-Israel rally. In Philadelphia. He went to, I think, the Philadelphia Stand with Israel rally, and he was escorted everywhere by guess who?
Not Rabbi Shmuley again.
Rabbi Shmuley.
Okay. Yeah.
So here's Rabbi Shmuley. I mean, and this really speaks to what's going on around the West, the kind of crackdown on free speech and the attempt to intimidate anyone who protests this war. Shmuley, and I'm sure Shmuley is involved with this, he's promoting a truck with video screens going around Harvard, doxing Palestine Solidarity organizers on campus, painting them as anti-Semites. And he's saying, finally, we Jews are learning how to fight back. Never again. And this is kind of what it looks like. So you can see like Harvard's leading anti-Semites on the truck, and there are names of students and their faces. And it's sort of like a mobile canary mission truck, referring to the anonymous blacklist of students which seeks to deny them employment after. And it's like a fascist public humiliation ritual is what it is for students. While Jewish students claim that they're under threat because they're holding these rallies, and there's been a deliberate attempt to frame these rallies as pro-Hamas rallies, where there have been Palestine Solidarity rallies ever since I've been alive. This was RFK's sort of Jewish handler, Rabbi Shmuley, promoting a gigantic crackdown on free speech. And free speech is supposed to be one of the core planks of the RFK Jr. campaign. And the whole free speech warrior right wing, they're all for this too. I mean, It's so funny to see like Rebel News, the main right wing sort of independent or alternative news site in Canada that campaigned against the crackdown, the authoritarian crackdown on the Canadian truckers protesting mandates, is now essentially clamoring for a crackdown, including the seizure of bank accounts of Palestine Solidarity protesters in Canada. Toronto's mayor has refused to provide permits to Palestine Solidarity demonstrations. She is a Chinese Canadian who supported the riots in Hong Kong. France has banned Palestine Solidarity demonstrations, and the UK has denounced them as well as anti-Semitic.
Speaking with, there's a very big rally in London on Saturday. I believe it starts at 12 local time. And I know that in Paris, people defied the ban and went out anyway on Thursday. And, that has to keep happening.
Well, this is a time to not be intimidated. This, as we said, it's a mask off moment, and every day is a moral and ethical test. This is one of the biggest ones. And it's time to just speak up. I mean, it's a lesson I learned during the COVID event, when people around me and very close to me, I thought had been psychologically captured or hypnotized by the messaging, the official messaging. And I knew that though I had an obligation to speak up against something that I thought was wrong, and which certainly I didn't want for myself, I would interrupt relationships, disrupt them, and maybe even destroy them because people had been so hypnotized. This is another one of those times. And so it's important to keep a clear head and understand what the stakes are. The stakes are not only lives of Palestinians, although they are going to die in the thousands and thousands in a slaughterhouse if and when Israel invades. They're the lives of the captives in the Gaza Strip, and it's the fate of a region in which the United States is deeply militarily involved. And so this has to be a sobriety zone here. It has to be a Hasbara free zone. It's an anti-Hasbara zone. I'm declaring an anti-Hasbara zone. And Aaron, I mean, for our entire, as long as I can remember, as long as I've known you, we've been trying to do that on this particular issue. And it always feels like whenever we're making headway on another issue, this one brings us back in.
Yeah, I know. I mean, Norman Finkelstein was talking the other day about how a few years ago he gave up personally on the Palestinian cause because he felt it was so hopeless, and he felt as if the people of Palestine had given up too. And he checked out and went on to other issues, and writing his great book about so-called woke culture on the left. But now, of course, he's very much back into and speaking out as he always does so effectively. And yeah, look, this has been an issue with me my entire life. Both of us are Jewish, and I don't like to invoke it too much because Max, I think you have the same experience. I don't identify first with my Jewish identity. I'm not religious. I grew up in a secular household, but it was a part of my life. I went to Jewish summer camp. I have a lot of Jewish friends. My family on my father's side went through the Holocaust. And there is an aspect here where it's just, there's, on a personal note, there's no way we're going to allow our culture, our identity, our history to be cheapened and exploited to justify committing more atrocities. When they say never forgive, never forget, I mean, we take that seriously. And you can't look at the Gaza Strip right now and not be reminded of the Warsaw Ghetto and the uprisings there. What's his name? Baruch Kimmerling, leading Israeli sociologist. What did he say? He said the Gaza Strip is the world's largest concentration camp. And it's happening in front of our eyes, and it's happening in the name of Jewish people. But this is not just about Jewish people standing up. This is about anybody with a conscience around the world. Because truly, I mean, we've seen this in history before. When people do stand up, that could have an effect. I'm not saying it could for sure, but it does. Sometimes public opinion, a swell public outrage can have a constraining effect on state violence when it comes to the U.S. and its clients. And if there ever was a moment, it's now.
And it is important for Jews to speak up, not just against this atrocity, but against Zionism. Zionism has defiled our faith community. It's defiled our identity. And Zionists invoke all the world's Jews, Judaism itself, and just use the term Jews as a stand-in for Israel, so that whenever anyone criticizes Israel or protests it, they are attacking Jews. And that's the same mentality embraced by anti-Semites who seek to hold all Jews responsible for the crimes of Israel. So they're expanding and increasing anti-Semitism, and they're doing so by design, because anti-Semitism fuels Zionism. Zionism is contingent on Jews leaving the diaspora and moving to Israel and supporting Israel, because life in their own communities in the diaspora becomes untenable due to anti-Semitism. So this is an attempt for Netanyahu to fuel anti-Semitism. Remember, Netanyahu went to France, to Paris, after Al-Qaeda attacks against Jewish centers of life in Paris, and asked French Jews to leave their community and move to Israel. He always exploits anti-Semitism to advance the goals of Zionism. And what we see also with the occupation and the siege and the refusal of Palestinians to bow, and what happened on October 7th, which was made inevitable by this siege, as Hamas has openly stated in the press conference they held in English yesterday, which was completely ignored, where they said these attacks were a response to siege and occupation. They didn't say these were attacks to kill Jews. Zionism has failed on its core promise to Jews, which was to provide Jews with two things: security and Jewish sovereignty. Number one, there is no more dangerous place in the world today for Jews than inside Israel. They've gathered Jews there to make them into targets of the designated enemies that surround it, while indoctrinating them into the most hyper-militarized culture on the planet. Number two, Jewish sovereignty. What sovereignty does Israel have when it needs American, French, and British aircraft carriers to protect it from guerrilla bands that have surrounded it? Guerrilla bands of people that they've occupied and ethnically cleansed. What sovereignty is there? These are Gentile authorities in Washington, London, and Paris. These are not Jews coming to support Jews. Israel wouldn't survive 1 minute without its direct line to the whatever Gentile is in the White House. Yeah. Barack Obama, he called himself Baruch in speeches to pro-Israel groups. I mean, this is the kind of degradation of our culture and faith that emanates from Zionism. So it's just this failed ideology, which now is carrying out a brutal assault to put down a ghetto rebellion. And if you don't see what's really happening, that never again doesn't just apply to Jews, then you're on the other side.
Yep. And, on the issue of Zionism, people talk about it as a reaction to historical oppression of Jews. And there's truth to that. But now it's something far beyond that. Now, as you write about in your book, Goliath, it's an outright expression of supremacy. It's one of the most chauvinistic ideologies in the world. It holds that we are superior. We have a right to all this land. These people don't. And we can do whatever we want. And I see that among people who I think mean well, Jewish people who mean well, but because of the culture of just growing up in Zionist circles, summer camps, synagogues, things like that, you get indoctrinated in this belief that really you are exceptional, that you are superior, you are the chosen people.
Yeah.
And that creates this culture where, and in your book, I mean, you're speaking to all these so-called liberal Israelis who all really believe in this, that somehow they have this divine right, and that there is something exceptional about Jews that deserves this land and has to be hyper militarized in defending it. That's an ideology of supremacy, and I don't want to be associated with that. What does that have to do with Judaism? And we're supposed to reject ideologies of chauvinism and supremacy, and Zionism should be no exception.
Well, we have to kind of drill down what the logic of Zionism means as applied to Gaza. And from the liberal Zionist point of view, there are two competing currents in Israeli society right now. There is the sort of liberal Zionist or enlightened Zionist mentality that you see playing out with these protests that had overtaken Tel Aviv against Netanyahu and a judicial reform and the religious nationalists he'd surrounded himself with, which have ended because many of them were military reservists and now they're primed to go bomb families in Gaza. Netanyahu's formed a war cabinet with their leadership, which consists of former Israeli army chiefs of staff. Their mentality was spelled out in a Haaretz editorial, Haaretz being the voice of the liberal public in Israel, the newspaper. During the Second Intifada, Haaretz published an editorial calling the war against Palestinians to put down their Intifada as a war for croissants in the morning and cafes at night. And what they meant by that is that they can't go and enjoy a European lifestyle in peace unless Palestinians, these Muslim barbarians, are put behind walls and disappeared. Yitzhak Rabin, who was the most famous political leader of that contingent of Israeli society, campaigned when he first ran for prime minister, or when he ran, I think, for re-election. No, when he first ran for prime minister, on Gaza out of Tel Aviv, removing all the Gaza workers out of Tel Aviv and making Tel Aviv into just like it was Berlin. And that's what this war is about. That's what the Gaza siege is about. It's about removing Palestinians from the sight of Israelis. And on October 7th, they broke out of their prison. They forced Israelis to see them through ruthless means. And that completely shattered the Israeli psyche. And in some ways, it offended the liberal public, the public that lives in the kibbutzim. These are secular communities with socialist roots. It offended them more than the religious nationalist public. But overtly, it was the religious nationalists in Netanyahu's cabinet who inspired this attack, this military operation, which is called by Hamas Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, because it was they who have been invading the third holiest site in Islam, the Al-Aqsa compound, led by Itamar Ben-Gvir, the security minister of Israel, in order to lay the groundwork for the Al-Aqsa compound's destruction and its replacement with a third Jewish temple in order to herald the coming of the Jewish Messiah. And in doing so, they're actually violating Jewish law as spelled out by the ultra-Orthodox rabbinate, which forbids them from going into this compound without sprinkling the gates with the blood of a red heifer. They're just not following all that. So that assault and affront to Islam by these extremists that Netanyahu has brought into key ministerial positions, the finance ministry, security minister, and in charge of the West Bank police, has made Hamas, provoked Hamas to appoint itself as the protector of global Islam, because no one else was able to protect that site. No one else was able to. Palestinians in Jerusalem are totally defenseless. They don't have weapons. There are 300,000 of them under occupation. So you have an apocalyptic wing of the Netanyahu government coming together with a colonial liberal wing that had been protesting Netanyahu to exterminate and disappear Palestinians in order to advance their separate political projects and to consolidate a psychological reality that Zionism had promised them, which is completely unattainable, completely impossible, delusional. They will never achieve it. Palestinians are never going to go away. But here they are being told by their government that this operation that they're about to wage inside the Gaza Strip will do it for them. They will finish the game. They're promising, what are they promising them? A final solution to the Palestinian question. And I don't know if there's anything you want to add. I want to start wrapping up.
Yeah, no, I think we can wrap it up. The one thing I wanted to ask you about was what you make of the reports that Egypt warned the Israeli government before all this happened that something like this was coming, and Netanyahu ignored it. That's what the reports say. And meanwhile, that part of the reason he ignored it, at least as it's being reported, is that Israel was so busy trying to enforce the occupation of the West Bank that they'd even transferred soldiers from near Gaza over to the West Bank to, back up their forces in the occupied territories of the West Bank.
Well, I think this was a moment of opportunity for the armed factions in the Gaza Strip that they had been preparing for 2 years since the cessation of hostilities in 2021, which was essentially a stalemate between Israel and Hamas. And they prepared openly. They've constructed a mock Israeli settlement military base inside Gaza and trained to enter it, attack it. We did see incursions and attacks on Israeli military bases in 2014, but nothing of this scale. So they prepared for this, and they were able to prepare openly for it. According to credible reports I've seen, citing sources inside Hamas, because they were telling Israel that they had no desire for military conflict. They wanted to surprise them. They needed the element of surprise. And they told them, we just want work permits for our people. We just want normalization under siege. We are willing to accept the siege, but we, give us a little bit more electricity. So we ration it for 10 hours instead of 8 hours. And they caught Netanyahu on his back foot at a time of internal crisis. It was a big opportunity to attack, given the political crisis inside Israel, given the weakness of Netanyahu's coalition. And the West Bank was on fire like no time since the Second Intifada, particularly the northern West Bank. So that's where the Israeli army had concentrated its forces. Hamas has a very good counterintelligence division. They probably fed falsehoods through the Israel's informant network inside Gaza. They probably knew who the snitches were and told them something false, and they caught them by surprise. And the reason that I don't buy that Israel allowed this to happen is just my understanding of the Israeli psyche, having spent years there, and how they see captives in Gaza. There's really nothing more traumatic to the Israeli psyche than the prospect of having dozens and dozens of its citizens held in the Gaza Strip, which is considered the physical epitome of evil.
And especially soldiers, right?
Especially soldiers.
Don't want to lose soldiers. Yeah.
And that's why I brought up the Hannibal directive before, that Israel has had a secret directive to kill its own soldiers when they become captive, because from a political point of view, giving concessions to Hamas, like, for example, trading 1,027 captives for Gilad Shalit, the captive Israeli soldier in 2011, is so painful. And they've never had a situation like this.
Right.
I believe that the Israeli military would rather have all of these captives dead than to have to make the concessions that are being demanded, which is, for example, the release of all Palestinian female prisoners for the release of all female captives. And that's why you saw them grabbing women from this EDM music festival, is to get their own captives out. That's what this is about. It's about diplomacy by other means, because all routes of diplomacy have been completely cut off and hopelessness reigns in Gaza. So I don't think this was, some kind of Netanyahu false flag where they let it happen. Although, I mean, there's obvious benefits to it. And that's something they know. They know that, anytime Hamas attacks or there's armed attack, they're going to extract as much political and diplomatic benefit as they can, and they always will be able to. But that does bring us to, I guess, one final point or question, and feel free to weigh in, but it's the military dimension. I mean, Israel has always been able to act with free hand against Palestinians militarily, but I think this time is a little bit different. And they may want to think twice before just going into Gaza with infantry and ground forces.
Well, you know what happened in 2014 better than I do. I know that in Shujaiya there was a really heavy battle and Israel took losses. You can imagine, though, that Israel's been preparing and, revising its battle plans based on its previous experience. But look, that's not my lane. So I'll defer to you on that. But certainly you can imagine that Hamas has been preparing for this too.
Well, I'll welcome you into this lane, because 99% of other alternative comment and mainstream commentators can't even drive. And that was true. That was a good point. In 2014, Israel took heavy losses in the east of Gaza City, in the area of Shujaiya, to Al-Qassam Brigade's forces that were weaker than they currently are now. They lost armored vehicles. They had captives taken. And I think when they go into urban warfare with these factions who also have tunnel networks and operate from within the population, in many ways the population supports it. There are sort of there are National Guard factions that come straight from the population that aren't as professionalized as the Qassam brigades, called the Nasser Salah ad-Din brigades. They're like the U.S. National Guard. They are playing to the advantage of the armed factions inside Gaza. And you hear that messaging openly from Abu Ubaidah, who is the spokesman for the military wing of Hamas, Al-Qassam, saying, essentially, we are ready for you when you come in. There's a psychological dimension too, which is that Palestinians living under siege, growing up under siege, deprivation, poverty, seeing their relatives killed in bombings continuously over years, are more willing to risk their lives and lose their lives fighting for their cause than Israeli soldiers who might want to just get back to their girlfriends in Tel Aviv or Haifa and go back to living their Western lifestyle. We saw that in Lebanon. The Lebanon war became untenable for Israel because they were losing so many soldiers, and the first peace movement in Israel developed around that just because of the casualties. It was led by 4 mothers of soldiers who had been killed. And that's also what spurred Israel's development of unmanned aerial vehicles, the drone, because they thought it would help save lives by sending robots into combat instead of people. So from the psychological and military point of view, I think Israel may be enacting a great folly along with a calamitous atrocity in the next several days. And I think it will take several days before they go in, but we'll be watching.
All right. Well, should we wrap it there, Max?
We'll wrap it there. And we really thank everyone for joining us. We had a large audience from around the world. We're going to be back next week. I think we'll still be looking at images of an unfolding atrocity next week. So we'll be back then. We are blacklisted by YouTube's algorithm. So please hit the like button. Subscribe to the Grayzone on YouTube. Follow us on Rockfin. I made this free on Rockfin. And who knows how long Twitter/X will last under the current algorithm. But there's definitely pressure on Elon to silence all of us. I mean, we're going to see increasing pressure to muzzle anyone who's speaking up against this. And that's why it's so important that everyone speak out, be sober, and create Hasbara-free zones wherever they are. Thanks a lot for being here, Aaron. And we'll see you guys soon. Peace.
Peace, everybody.